Western Sydney doesn't wait for permission, it builds. Welcome to Westside Stories, Beyond the CBD, the podcast where I sit down with the people shaping the engine room of Sydney. I'll chat with the leaders and community builders whose stories are bigger than a job title and whose impact is felt right across the West. Each episode is a real conversation about the moments that changed everything, the risks that paid off, the mistakes that hurt, and the lessons worth stealing. I'm Johnston. Let's get into today's story. All right, well, I'm here with David Borger, a well-known Western Sydney identity. And, David, welcome to the first ever Westside Stories podcast.
Thanks, Sean. Great to be here in Parramatta, Western Sydney.
Western Sydney, the heartbeat of it all. Now, I should, full disclosure to everyone, we're cousins. So I do know a lot about your background and history, but I think it'd be interesting to share it with people listening and watching today somewhere out there. Why don't we talk about the early days, Dave? You grew up in Sydney initially and then found yourself up in Queensland.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you know, like many people of my era, kind of parents get divorced, that happens. And so, mate, I remember growing up I went to 10 schools in 2 states. So Catholic schools, public schools, primary, high school. But that's a challenge when you've got to sort of pick yourself up and go to a new school and introduce yourself to a new bunch of people. And I think it probably explains to some extent, I mean, you've got to sink or swim in those situations. So I feel like I'm pretty outgoing. I get on with people as well as I can. And, you just got to sort of jump into the playground and get to know people.
How did you learn any skills at that point about how to make? Are you still friends with any of those people?
Look, there's still some mates, particularly from high school, but I mean that's a lot of territory, a lot of distance, a lot of miles between now and then. Look, I think one of the great things about going to a new school so often is, if you've made mistakes in the past, you can sort of you can fix it up in the next one. So you get a chance to sort of kind of reinvent yourself in a weird way as a young kid. But look, it is challenging going to that many sort of schools. We moved around a lot, but I think the issue for me, mate, was I actually dropped out of school at one point and wanted to just go and work and have a job, as lots of people did in those days. And then I sort of made the decision to go back and study again, and that was sort of a challenging one.
Yeah. And did you make that decision for yourself, or did you have support people around you at the time that helped with that?
So I think, when I was younger, there's a lot of my mates that just wanted to get out, work. We weren't sort of that into school, and we wanted some freedom. We wanted some pocket money and the independence that sort of gave you. And so I actually dropped out and worked in a spring factory in Newtown called Jubilee Springs, and put on a boiler suit, jumped on the Red Rattler trains as you did back in those days, and got the train into Newtown when it still had factories. And but it was a pretty boring old job, mate. So my job, I had 2 jobs. One was to actually pick springs up from a bucket and then put them in a machine. It was like a rotating disc, and you had to drop them in. So it was pretty boring, It was a job that a machine should probably be doing. The other one was to sort of weld outboard motor springs. But both of them were kind of process work type jobs. And I think, I was a little bored. They kind of liked me. They wanted me to do an apprenticeship. And I'd heard that my brother had, I think by that stage, got into uni or was heading towards uni. And I remember watching the movie Dead Poets Society, where the key character was this inspirational teacher. And I thought there's got to be something in this education. And I could almost sort of see, there was a pathway. You could sort of do this for the rest of your life and you probably wouldn't earn much money and it might be pretty boring, or you could do something else. And so that's what I decided to go back to school and kind of lock myself in the room and got into uni eventually.
Yeah, right. And so what you came down from Queensland, and I hope you don't mind me saying you were living rough for a bit.
Oh, yeah. Look, we had, I was at my grandparents on the Gold Coast and kind of ran away from home at one stage. And yeah, there was a couple of homeless nights. So, I have great sympathy for people that are kind of doing it tough out there. But look, a lot of young kids go through this. A lot of families go through this. For me, it was only for a short space of time, but it does, I think, teaches you a bit of humility and also a bit of a desire to sort of get out of there and get somewhere better.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so then you go to uni. What happened there? What did you study at uni, and how did you go at school?
So I remember being at school, and I had lots of subjects I was interested in, but I was really fundamentally interested in the economics. And at first, I think in year 11, I sort of didn't fully understand it, and I couldn't quite grasp some of the concepts. And I kind of worked hard at it, and then eventually thought, well, this is how nations rise and fall. This is how, if you want to create wealth and prosperity for everyone and lift people up, out of places, you've got to have a strong economy and understand those levers and which ones need to be pulled. So, yeah, I remember studying economics at the University of Sydney. Loved it. Again, it was like another school you had to turn up to and sort of meet people. But didn't quite, like a lot of young people, they get to their 20s, even when you study, you often don't know what you're going to do next. And there's so many, you go and ask 10 people what they studied at uni and what they're doing now. And, I reckon 5 out of 10 are going to be doing something completely different, because I think we don't quite know what the menu in life is when we're that age. We don't know what we're really great at or what we're terrible at. But I did economics and then still wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I'd always had a sort of interest in politics, though. And, read the papers, watched the debates, the days of Paul Keating and Bob Hawke. And I knew kind of which side I was on, and loved that, and just sort of thought, well, maybe I could get involved in this. Maybe I could join a political party and get involved, and I eventually did.
So let's talk about that just for a little bit and not get too political. But how did you end up on the Labor side of politics? What was it about that side that drew you to them?
Look, I think it was, we weren't dirt poor or anything like that, but money was pretty thin when I was younger, and you certainly had a sense of them and us, of the haves and the have-nots, and also a sense of social justice. I think wanting to kind of live in a world where people had an equal opportunity to survive and do well, and I kind of very much associated that with one side of politics. And eventually got involved in Young Labor, which is almost a cult, but it's something that you never sort of forget. I think I joined in the last year of uni. I joined the sort of Benelong YLA, as it was then called, and met one of my great mates of life, Aaron Magner, top bloke, who's now a councillor over at Randwick Council. But yeah, just got involved in those debates, discussions. It's kind of funny because in some ways, you get these idealistic young people joining youth political movements, but actually the business of those movements is often not idealism. It's about counting the numbers, stacking the branches, winning the conferences, and kind of learning the art of politics, the dark arts of politics, I guess.
Yeah. I remember you dragged me along to a few of those things to
we stack the branches.
All right, so you finish uni, you do economics, and then you go on to further study?
Yeah, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do next. I was going to do honours and then graduate law. I started for a little while, and but eventually went back and did some town planning, and then started a Master of Urban Design. So I was very interested in the way cities were built. I mean, I think living in Parramatta, you always had a sense that, why were we Dallas on the cheap, and why did other places look differently? Why did they have great public buildings, grand civic spaces?
Yeah.
What were the things that actually makes a city livable and interesting, and how do we get more of it here? So I was just always fascinated in cities, I think.
Yeah. We're definitely going to come back and explore that in a moment. Before we do, then you had your political career, and you were the youngest ever Lord Mayor here in Parramatta.
Look, I was, and it's kind of interesting because I remember I was in a pre-selection against the then Lord Mayor of the city, and they counted the ballots in Granville Town Hall, and I think I won by 3 votes. So that was a bit of an upset because young upstarts weren't meant to beat sort of popular mayors that had been there for a long, long time. And I've got to say I'd only been to one council meeting before I got elected, so I had to sort of learn that whole art of what is the council, what does it do, how do you make change? That's the other thing. How do you work together? And councils they're weird places. There's often a lot of politicking, and there's something about the dynamic of the horseshoe that often people don't see their best personality coming out in those chambers. But I found council interesting and fun, and tried to work out how do I use my little voice to sort of make things happen and create some change. And so became mayor at a very young age, and it was kind of interesting mayors in New South Wales under our act, they have almost no source of power. Their job is to be the leader and to chair the council. That's basically it. Unless the council votes and delegates something to them and says, Sean, you're the mayor, you have the delegation to this, which rarely happens. So the only way you can really get things done is by working with people and getting some consensus and agreement, and kind of using soft power, and the media and things like that. And so I felt when I was first mayor, mayors can also do a thing called a Lord Mayoral Minute. So you can actually turn up to the meeting on a Monday night or whenever and say, I want you to vote for this. Let's spend this money. Let's do this thing. Let's change this policy. Let's whatever. And I'd turn up every Monday night with a whole bunch of ideas I'd have during the week, and we'd write up the minutes and we'd put them to the council, and they pretty much went through. And then one night, I remember going to council, putting this mayoral minute up, and it didn't get up.
Mhm.
And it didn't bother me that the people that didn't agree with me didn't vote for me, but even the people on my own side didn't vote. Some of them didn't vote for me. I remember being really disappointed, going home saying to my wife, Giselle, look, how did this happen? And she said, well, who did you ring? And I said, well, I rang no one. I'm the mayor. I'm just turning up with my ideas and they're voting for them. And so that's crazy. You can't do that. You've got to ring people. You've got to ring the people that support you, the people that you're in the middle, and the people that disagree with you, and work them through it. And that was a really important lesson in life, that if you want to get change, if you want to use any sort of power, you kind of need to try and bring people with you. And so from then on, I did try and talk to people much more regularly, get their opinions, and argue my case before we put something up before council.
Right. And I guess there's good lessons for your next career when you venture into your next stage of politics with all that.
Yeah, absolutely. It was kind of interesting that I think when I was involved in politics at Parramatta, and I was the mayor, I stood for the federal seat back in, I think, 2001. It was a marginal seat. We had a chance. I was against Ross Cameron, who I know very well. I actually got on fine with Ross on a personal basis. But it was very, very tight. And we spent a year sort of knocking on doors, phoning people, communicating with people, putting our case forward. It's a tough, hard. I mean, people like to criticise pollies, and I guess we're disappointed in our political class often. We feel like, particularly now, people feel like they've let us down. The rise of One Nation, I think, is a testament to that. But they do work pretty hard, and particularly in those long, hard marginal seat campaigns. But yeah, tragically, at the end of the year, it was the year that the World Trade Center was bombed. So it was a defence type election, and John Howard played well to that. And I remember sitting in Westmead Hospital with Kim Beazley. So Labor was going to announce a policy around dental care for pensioners, good Labor policy. Lots of people in the community would be interested in that. And so I remember how many TV cameras there were, and I thought, hang on, there's only 4 channels. How can there be 10 TV cameras? But we had the whole National Press Gallery there, and that story should have been the first or second story of the night. And I remember going home, and it was like a half-an-hour bulletin, and it was like 29 minutes into the bulletin, we finally came on for 15 seconds, and I thought, we're really going to struggle to get our message through. So yeah, that was a challenge going through that election and getting to the end, and I think we lost by 1.1%. So
wow,
we're close to the most.
How do you get home that night, and how do you feel? Run us through the feelings that are going through you at that point?
Yeah, look, I remember Laurie Ferguson once saying to me, Rodney Cavalier was a former member of Parliament around the Gladesville area, and when he lost his seat, Laurie said Rodney felt like he had let down the whole town and he couldn't face them. And I think people feel a bit like that, because you're putting yourself on the line, and people are saying, no, we don't want you, we want the other person. So yeah, it was a difficult year that year, because we'd lost the seat, hadn't paid off my house. My wife Giselle got cancer, which was tough. We didn't know what it was. I mean, she's great now. She recovered fully, but it took 8 months of chemo and a lot longer to recover. So that was kind of the annus horribilis, the terrible year.
Yeah.
Where you had to sort of scramble to get back a career and look after family and get back on track.
So how then do you do that? Because you went and had another stint then. Then you decide to attack New South Wales politics and see what you can do there. But how do you pick yourself up from that to get back to a situation where you eventually get elected into state politics?
Look, I think what worked for me, Sean, was I think in the earlier, when I was with me the first time, I was very much doing things that I thought people wanted me to do, people in my own party and people factionally and local branches and so on. Second time around, I sort of thought, well, this is really the last shot, so I might as well sort of be me, do things my own way, and if that meant sort of focusing on campaigning and trying to fix the design issues with Parramatta, then I was going to do that. And I was I was sort of interested in big ideas that could change and improve the city. I was much less interested in the mowing the lawns and picking up the rubbish. And they were important issues, and there were lots of people that could do that. But to me, that wasn't going to change the world. So I wanted to focus on how could we be a great city? How could we get public investment in public transport? how could we sort of promote the city as a second CBD? I know people hate that; they hate to be the second CBD, but let's face it, Sydney's got a role, Parramatta's got a role. It is the most successful second centre in Australia, and it's an overnight success. It's taken about 30 years of bloody hard work, and that's kind of what I threw myself into. And I think that kind of be true to yourself. I've often found, Sean, that there's good points and bad points about everyone's personality and character, and I found focusing on the things that you think you can do well and doubling down on that is far better than spending lots of time worried about the things you can't do well. So that's kind of what I focused on, and that seemed to work politically. And then there was this opportunity to run for the state seat of Granville and to get into state parliament. So yeah.
Okay. And what did that teach you, your time in state politics?
Look, it's interesting. Like, I think people think of Parliament as the place where everything happens. Parliament's very important for laws. It's very important for big votes. But actually, a lot of government is executive government. It's ministers and their secretaries and their agencies. Not everything requires a law to be changed. A lot of it's about where you spend money and what is the policy. What are the regulations that you've got within your purview. And so I actually found Parliament bad theatre. I thought it was a place of high risk. A lot of people drank too much and they had parties, and there was a lot of people on the backbench that sort of didn't want to be there. People were a bit frustrated. And so I could see a lot of risk in people just hanging around Parliament and, going to drinks. And it's a weird workplace because you're sitting around sometimes till quite late in the evening waiting for a vote. Normally when people would be at home with their family watching TV, but you're still there in this kind of frat house Parliament with lots of risk. So I felt that, Parliament was sort of less interesting than actually the business of government. And I was really lucky in a way. We were governing during the global financial crisis. I was the housing minister. The housing minister got nothing normally. The great period of expansion in social housing came after the Second World War. And then there was a long period of sort of underinvestment. And so what happened, though, during the global financial crisis was there was a stimulus. We had to get the economy moving. We had brick manufacturers in Western Sydney that basically turned the kilns off. So people needed work. We had to sort of turn this thing around, and getting housing moving was part of that. And so suddenly we had sort of billions of dollars of additional money to spend for the right reason. We had Tanya Plibersek, who was the Commonwealth Minister. I got on really well with Tanya. And we decided, our Secretary Mike Allen and myself, that we were going to beat every other state in delivering this. So we kind of pulled out all stops. We changed laws. We basically said, look, we're in a crisis. We have to act like it's a crisis, which means, we're not going to lodge the application with the local council anymore. We haven't got time to spend 9 months, politicising the whole thing. We're going to give ourselves self-approval powers. We're going to get the sort of townhouse builders employed. We're going to buy stuff off the plan. And we just had this army of project consultants to try and deliver these billions of dollars of housing. And we beat every other state. I'm really proud of that. And it was great to have that opportunity to do something. But that was more executive government rather than sitting around the Parliament.
Yeah. And I think you go back to why you're incentivised yourself to get into politics and, your achievements that you achieved there. Were there people in Parliament that didn't have that view, that there was just self-interest that they were involved in?
Yeah, I don't like to talk ill of people because there's lots of great people that go into politics for great reasons. But yeah, there is people, there's factional operatives and people that like playing games and that like building power bases, I guess, but are perhaps less interested in which levers do you push to change the world? How do you kind of improve things for people?
Yeah.
But yeah, there's lots of those characters in politics, Sean, and some of them get into positions of power. And I do think we have seen a period in politics. Chris Minns, I think, Mike Baird, even Dominic Perrottet, not on my stripe, but I think they have kind of risen above some of that pettiness a little bit in recent years. There's been a sense of understanding that the person across the chain. I got on really well with Mike Baird, Rob Stokes. I felt like I wasn't playing the person, and you can agree on a lot of people on the other side, and there's got to be more of that, I think.
So why I've asked that question is, if you relate that back to the workplace, it's hard in politics because someone's there for a period of time. They're there for 4 years. In the workplace, they might be there as well, but that sort of stuff happens in the workplace. So how do you negotiate with those people and deal with them under scenarios where they might have different agendas to what you're looking at doing?
Yeah, look, it's a challenge. Like, I think, my sense, I've always felt that when I'm sort of working with teams, it's good to try and use the intelligence of the team, treat people as adults, and try and come to a consensus. I mean, managers have got to make ultimate calls, so they've got to make an ultimate call. That's fine, but I think the best managers are like coaches. They're trying to sort of get the team focused on the outcome. And I think great teams have a way of not letting anyone drop the ball. If someone drops the ball, someone else is going to pick it up and catch it. Yes, so my sense is we've all got differences of opinions, but you've got to sort of try not to play people personally and try and work on that kind of team approach where you can all focus on the outcome and take everyone's opinions on board. Like everyone should have an opportunity to express an opinion, to have an idea. We want the ideas to come forward.
So you were in state politics for how many years?
I mean, it was only one term. People think it was 2 or 3 terms, but it was a eventful term, yeah.
Okay, and then it happens again, the disappointment.
I did, yeah. No, so I mean, politics is challenging. Like we had the tsunami. We'd been in for 12 years. It was a bit like the last days of the Roman Empire. There was infighting in the cabinet, in the party room. We'd torn down premiers, and it's kind of weird because me and I think Barry Firth and a few others, we were sort of young, bright. We hadn't sort of blotted our copybook, and we were sort of trying to get in there and sort of do the right thing. At the same time, the kind of walls were falling down around you, and the ceiling was leaking. So yeah, the big wave came, and it sort of didn't matter if you were good, bad, or indifferent. A lot of people got taken out in that wave, and I found myself kind of washed to the shore again. We lost the seat. We didn't expect to win the seat. To lose the seat. Even Anthony Green, the electoral, I spoke to him, and he said, "You'll be okay." Well, we weren't. I guess after that, the issue for me was it wasn't like the first time because, we were healthy. We kind of had a house. No one was taking that away. I felt I'd done the right thing, and so we had a period of having a break, went overseas for a little while, but then had to sort of rebuild and do something else.
And did it? So it got easier the second time to accept it in terms of the resilience?
Absolutely, 100%. I think A, you'd been through it before. B, the circumstances were a little better, and B, but C, I think it's because you know you can get through this because you've done it once before. So, not that it was easy. I mean, I made the mistake of from recruitment point of view. This is very interesting. People do this. They're a minister. Someone's driving around in a car. Lots of important people are sitting around. I hope I don't have a big ego. I think everyone's got some sort of an ego, but I think when you finish, you sort of expect someone's just going to ring me, right? Someone's going to ring me. I'll just wait for the phone to call. And I'd busy myself. I did lots of other stuff. I set up a company and then joined it with a mate of mine, and that's still going. Think Planners. It's a great planning company based in Western Sydney. But I did expect the phone to call, and I remember seeing someone after about 9 months he's a recruitment person who'd worked for the Hawke government. So people said, "You got to go and see this person." And he said, "Well, have you picked up your phone book and rang anyone?" And I said, "No, I've been waiting to ring me." And he said, "Well, you've got to ring people." And so I took the advice. I rang 2 people and kind of had 2 job offers within a week. So I thought that's another lesson to learn. You got to reach out.
So networking, still important.
100%, yeah. And don't expect someone to give you a call, It doesn't matter if you've had an important job. You're nobody today, so you've got to sort of start again.
Yeah, okay. So I want to talk about Western Sydney in a bit more detail in a minute, but what did that political career, just in summary, what did it all teach you? What sort of skills that people could potentially use in the business world?
Yeah. So I think it certainly told me that, you kind of see how decisions are made, big decisions, particularly government decisions, and so you understand the government process. I think you understand public affairs, like the role of the media in advocating for things, and on big decisions, it's often very, very important. Like I think back to, I remember back in the 80s, there was a campaign to stop a train going to Bondi, and Michael Caton, the famous actor from The Castle, was there on the beach saying, "Don't bring the train here." I couldn't believe that people were sort of against infrastructure that would transform cities. But it kind of made me think that these really big mega projects, they often do require advocacy in the community. And so the one I was sort of most involved with was Badgerys Creek Airport, Western Sydney Airport. I remember when every council in Western Sydney voted against the airport, they joined a kind of alliance of councils that were opposed to the air. We thought that the negative externalities, the noise impacts and so on, were going to be destructive for the region. And even at the time, I couldn't quite understand it. I thought, airports are job engines. Cities used to design themselves around ports or central railway stations. They were the hubs of economic activity, of job creation, of entrepreneurship and opportunity. And airports are a bit like that now. Cities really are being designed around airports, and I just couldn't understand why. We've planned and zoned and reserved this area. It's a long way from where lots of people live. And so that was, I guess, one of the first campaigns in my current job we're involved. We spent a year going around. We did a cost-benefit study with Deloitte. We built an alliance. And this I think this is really interesting. So we basically put together a group called the Western Sydney Airport Alliance. We had Labor and Liberal mayors from the area. We had businesses. We had trade unions. We had universities. We had sporting teams like the Wanderers and others come on board. And we formed this kind of coalition of strange bedfellows, and that had impact. Like, we spent a year campaigning on that, and Tony Abbott at the time actually sort of wrote a thing acknowledging the role of this alliance in changing the views of Western Sydney. So I certainly think I learnt a lot about public affairs, but also sometimes building these alliances of different people that can have impact.
Okay. So, and this is in your current role, just to be clear, your role as Business Western Sydney. So we'll come back to that. How did you fall in love with Western Sydney?
Yeah, so I think it started with Parramatta. Like, I always felt that there was the Macquarie grid of streets was fine grain. It was 19th century. It was walkable. It had good building blocks. It had a river running through the middle of it. It had some historic fabric that was left over. But equally, it had become Dallas on the cheap. It was going to be something in the 80s. There was a mini boom. Then it crashed. And I always just felt that, I wanted to live in a place that looked great, and that functioned well, and it generated jobs. I mean, that's the big thing in Western Sydney. The barbecue stopper in this region has been, how far you have to travel to get a good job. And it used to be the case that sort of all the good jobs were in the Sydney CBD. I think that's changing a little bit now. But trying to create something in the very centre of the metropolis. I mean, if you dropped a pin in the middle of Sydney, it would land somewhere around near Parramatta. I mean, that's a good place for us to generate smart jobs close to home. So I was always interested in that. And I think it's that social justice thing, mate, that, there are people living in southwest Sydney. There's one council in southwest Sydney that's got one train station, and it's exploding. The inner west, I think, has got 39 light rail, heavy rail, metro and ferry stops. So there's this inequality in the distribution of transport opportunities in Western Sydney. And I just always felt, I think Western Sydney hadn't been properly, it had been taken for granted by a lot of people for a long time.
Yep.
And it needed people fighting for it. And, it's where I live. So,
Well, just a quick one. This is why I love these conversations. Western Sydney is full of people doing big things quietly, and the lessons are practical. If this episode resonates, follow the show and share it with one person who'll get value back from it. Back to it. Okay, and can you tell us a little bit about your role at the moment and what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. So I've been in this role for 13 years. So I'm the Executive Director of Business Western Sydney. So we've got like 150 companies, organisations. We often have the CEOs, the managing partners, vice chancellors of larger groups, education, health, development, professional services, construction. We try and bring that group together basically to connect in with government. So we do about 50 events per year, normally with ministers of government, sometimes opposition leaders, department secretaries. And I guess we're always advocating. So there's 3 or 4 things each year we'll try and pick up and say, we think this is an opportunity for change and reform, and we'll sort of push an agenda and try and get a result. So that's the sort of stock. We did a lot of media. I love the members. They're a great group of people. I've found actually, there's some amazing people working in corporate life that actually do have are very generous in trying to find good solutions for the broader community. I hope we've done some good work over the years anyway.
Yeah, okay. Now, one thing that's noticeable is the divide within Western Sydney. The northwest seems to be flourishing. There's great transport that's being built up there. Infrastructure investment. That's the one side, and then you look at southwestern Sydney that probably needs a little bit more attention. Is that a fair comment? What are your views on that?
I think it's a fair comment. And I guess I'd say, when we started this, people often use Parramatta as a placeholder for Western Sydney, and governments often use Parramatta as a place to put funding in, saying we've done something for Western Sydney. And I think we had to do Parramatta. It's it's a significant centre that's going well. But yeah, look, you're absolutely right. There's that triangle of opportunity between the hills, Parramatta and Blacktown. Very high educational completion rates, high proportions of graduates, infrastructure that's still being built. The Northwest train lines transformed the Northwest. We've got Metro West on its way here.
Yeah.
So I think that's all doing well. It's not perfect, but then you go to the Southwest, particularly the area between Liverpool, Camden, Campbelltown, Wallandilly. I mean, that's a big region. That's almost 700,000 people living in it. But a very different story in terms of opportunity, transport, and education. So, we think that's been undercooked. It needs some focus. It needs some train lines to connect it to Sydney, to opportunities. I know the government sort of probably thinks that they built too many metros at the same time. That's probably true. It was inflationary, crowded out the housing market. That wasn't good. But we can't, we can't go back to doing nothing. We have to keep going and keep pushing.
So let's talk about the airport again. I mean, how important is the airport going to be in terms of building that region up to mirror the Northwest?
Yeah, look, I think the airport's critical. It's got the CEO, Simon Hickey's an amazing guy. He's doing a fantastic job at building that airport. It's on budget, it's on time, and it's going to be open later this year, I think late October this year. Look, I think governments, we often criticise governments, they haven't done the right thing, they haven't done enough, but they've actually put $15 billion into the airport, the M12, the new motorway that's opening this Saturday, that'll connect the airport to the M7. They've put money into the airport line between St Mary's and the airport, and they've put money into a whole lot of surrounding infrastructure. There's $15 billion. So, look, I think we can't have a strong aerotropolis without a strong airport. I think there's an opportunity to open up new routes, and I know the airport's sort of looking at that. So I'm optimistic. I think, freight's good. I think it's great to connect Western Sydney to the world. Most of the freight's carried in the underbelly of passenger aircraft. So the more planes we've got flying to other countries, the more opportunities we've got to, ship perhaps fresh produce into Singapore for someone's breakfast. I think it's really going to open up Western Sydney. And, next to the airport, we've got Bradfield, this new city that's being built with its own train station. Someone said the other day, I think it was Ken Morrison, the head of Bradfield, that so government's putting $15 billion, but there's already been $22 billion worth of investment in like Mamre Road and surrounding. Aldi was announced the other day. So I think there's a great growth story around the Aerotropolis, and also I think it's going to affect tourism as well. We've got 8,000 beds in Western Sydney. It's not enough, and once the airport starts thriving, a lot of them will be taken up for cabin and crew. So there's 1,000 hotel rooms I think are under construction in Parramatta alone at the moment. So I think there's this opportunity. We don't think of visitor economy and tourism as Western Sydney, but actually we've got a lot of migrants who have family back in the home country who like to come here and stay and spend. I mean, this is an economic opportunity as well.
Let's roll into some of your opinions then on how we can make Parramatta and the region here, Greater Western Sydney, better. Let's start with the urban design piece. You're passionate about that. If I gave you free rein, free license, what would you do moving forward to design Western Sydney better?
Yeah, sure. Look, I think there's a big opportunity with Metro West because where they're building these train stations like the one in Parramatta, in some cases they've compulsorily acquired a very large parcel of land. There's a big development opportunity. So if people have seen Parramatta Square, this big new development, about 45 years old now, that's like 200,000 square metres of space. That's like 20,000 jobs. That's huge. Well, the Metro West site will do that again. So I think what's really interesting is, how do we actually get the right mix of uses? And I've got to say, nighttime economy, we look nostalgically. We go on holidays to other places and we listen to music. We come back to Sydney and we find there's nothing, particularly in Western Sydney. So I would love to see, the Roxy be re-established, be a great venue for music and comedy right next to a metro station. And, John Graham, I think, is doing a great job as minister. I've spoken a lot to him and Peter Regan and suggested, in that tight knuckle of transport with light rail, heavy rail, metro rail, where government sort of controls everything below the ground, above the ground, there's an opportunity there to create an entertainment district, a Times Square for Sydney. So, I think from a design point of view and from an economic point of view, there's a real opportunity to get development right there. I mean, I'd sort of start there. I also think, rivers are very important. We've got 270 kilometres of rivers in Western Sydney. We don't have any beach. There's no surfing. Well, there is at Urban Surf on Olympic Park, but other than that, there's no beach. There's Pondi at Penrith.
You got Lake Parramatta.
We got Lake Parramatta, but I mean, we do have this riverfront. And cities with rivers are blessed, and we've kind of turned our backs on the rivers. You can't swim in the rivers, you can't walk to them, you can't walk down them. Access is poor. I think people are keen to get access to water, and we put out a report suggesting government could do a lot more to get these rivers cleaned up. I mean, just test the water. We test the water quality in the ocean.
Mm.
Let's do it in the rivers as well. And why can't we look at getting sandy river beaches in those parts of the rivers that are clean
Mm-hmm.
and just get more public access to them? So I think, we've got to turn our cities into the rivers and start, taking advantage of them.
Right. Okay. And so how far has Western Sydney come since you've been involved in it in the last 20, 30 years?
I think it's come a long way, Sean. Like I think people in Western Sydney sort of 20 years ago felt a bit sheepish about coming from Western Sydney. I think they felt they were kind of looked down. I think it's still looked down to some extent, but there's a bit of pride out there now. Like I think people kind of, when they come from Western Sydney and they're working with someone who's from Western Sydney, they build a connection and they're kind of quite proud of where they come from. People in Western Sydney don't need to be saved. They just want to be taken seriously. But I think we've come a long way in places like Parramatta. Looking ahead, we've got the Riverside Theatres being rebuilt, the Powerhouse Museum's opening later this year, $1 billion investment in culture and the arts, biggest since the Opera House, first tier 1 cultural institution we'll have. I mean, that will transform the city. So I think some areas have transformed enormously. We've still got a long way to go, particularly in the southwest.
Yeah. How do we get people in and out of the CBD at Parramatta in a more efficient way? Because there's really only a few small streets that lead into Parramatta. Is there something we could do about that?
Yeah, I've got to say the street network, even though we are a grid, the street network is challenged in Parramatta. The light rail is fantastic. I think it's going to be great. Long-term patronage will grow. But it did change the direction of vehicles and all. And there's a lot of streets that you can't turn left, you can't turn right. You find yourself going around in a bit of a circle. So, look, Parramatta's got to be a public transport city. We've lost a number of the big multi-story car parks as well with recent development. So I think it's going to be challenging in the future. But, Sean, I remember going to San Francisco a couple of years ago and seeing robo-taxis, the Waymo driverless vehicles. I hear there's a rumour that there might be a trial in New South Wales. Like, I think give it 10 years and I think we're going to have those options as well as public transport.
Right. Okay. Let's talk about the future of Parramatta then, and other sorts of businesses that we might want to come and explore Western Sydney. You've got Woolworths who are out here. You've got ABC that's just moved here. I mean, there's millions of businesses that we could list. What sort of business suits Western Sydney? Yeah,
look, obviously, Parramatta can deal with corporate businesses. There are other parts of the city. So I think two things. One, we need to do more to develop more industrial lands, business estates, industrial estates. We have the most expensive industrial land in the world. And within Queensland does a great job of doing this. There's a government agency that goes out and invests, sorts out the infrastructure, sorts out the planning. We've got a terrible planning system. And I know the Premier's keen on sort of changing that. But I think from the industrial side, we need to roll out more industrial estates. Otherwise, we're going to suffer. We'll see business go to sort of Brisbane and to Melbourne. In the corporate sense, I think one of the missed opportunities, which we may start to look at now, is IT and tech. When you look at where the tech workers live in Sydney, there's this kind of area between Parramatta and Blacktown where you've got the thickest labour market, the most number of tech workers resident. I think postcode 2150, which is Parramatta, actually has the highest number of tech workers. So when I see Tech Central being built at Central, I sort of think, wouldn't you build Tech Central where you've got the best access to talent? I know that there's an Indian CRM company that's setting up their head office that's opening in 2 weeks in Parramatta. And I think there's opportunities in the tech space as well. Absolutely.
Okay. And what about the old women's hospital and the Parramatta Prison Precinct? What do you think should be done there?
Yeah, look, that's an area of amazing heritage. Even some of the trees are heritage listed down there. It's colonial heritage. Obviously, that should be protected. I totally agree with that. But I think we're going to activate that area. There is a proposal for the University of Sydney to build a campus there. I think that would be fantastic. It's a great brand. It's light rail enabled now, so the light rail goes through the middle of it. It connects both Westmead and Parramatta very quickly. And there's also a proposal by the government to develop some new housing there. And we're in the middle of a housing crisis. We need to activate that place with people. We need to get that University of Sydney campus up there, and we need to sort of, conserve and open up that heritage for everyone's. Part of the challenge is there's something like 50, I think, heritage listed buildings. They did do a few of them up a couple of years ago that look amazing, but they still need a lot of money to actually conserve and enhance those old buildings and give them new uses. Could be creative industries, could be tourism. But I think there's huge potential down there. It's one of the real assets, the gems of Parramatta.
Okay. And Again, who would be responsible for that? Who do you chat to when you're dealing with matters like that?
Yeah. So Property Development New South Wales have carriage of that precinct. They're
Right.
an agency of government that sort of develops assets, but they also often inherit old hospitals that no one wants. They've got one in Manly. I think they've got this one. In the future, they may get the one in Liverpool. So they're really the agency that deals with this. They do have a proposal to build housing. I think it's gone through planning. The market now needs to build that. That's meant to generate some funds, and then they're meant to sort of use some of those funds to sort of fix up the old building. So it's a kind of two-way process of development, getting some of that, reinvesting that back into the site. So it's going to take a while to get that precinct going, but it doesn't need to be a bit of a push, I agree.
Okay. All right. Let's fast forward 10 years. What does Western Sydney look like?
Well, Western Sydney will be bigger, so we're one of the big population growth areas in the state. I think, fast forward 10 years in Parramatta, certainly you'll have the powerhouse opening and booming, 2 million visitors a year. You'll probably have 10 new hotels, all with a different offer around town. You'll have a Broadway-style theatre at Parramatta, 1,500-seater, I think, with big, long-run productions. I think the Roxy will be open.
What's it doing?
The Roxy?
Mm.
I think the Roxy is a bit like the Emerald. I think it's music and comedy. It's entertainment, really. It's, the Riverside can stage theatre and musicals. I think the Roxy is more about sort of, music and comedy. But you're also going to have all of that area around Parramatta Square that's developed. So I think, Parramatta is going to double in size. And I think it's going to, if you look at it now, it's almost there, but it's like there's a few teeth that are missing. There's a few building sites. There's a few cranes that are still around. So I think we'll probably be sort of dismantling those cranes, and I think it'll be a fantastic city, Sean. But look, for broader Western Sydney, I think Liverpool's a place we need to do more in. It's also got a grid of streets. Wasn't able to grab the commercial office opportunity, but there's universities opening there. So we've got Wollongong University, UNSW is keen to open, Western Sydney's already there. Liverpool could become a university town, absolutely. And then further afield, I think, places like Campbelltown, we really have to, the challenge for Campbelltown is the city centre was kind of designed for cars rather than people.
Yep.
And so we've got to build around that. We've got to make sure there's a lot of land to the south of Campbelltown, which is very car dependent. And south of Campbelltown, the trains are diesel, which means they're small, they're slow. People don't use them very much. They get electrified when they get to Campbelltown. So I think we need to electrify that whole route and stop making Campbelltown, the biggest commuter car park in the world, because that's what we do. Every year we build more and more commuter car parks.
Yep.
There's greater population. I mean, if you can't crowd your city out with a car park, it needs an employment solution.
So the employment solution we've spoken about, businesses should be coming to Western Sydney because of, this is where the talent is out this way as well. Let's talk about the housing crisis, right? How can Western Sydney help solve that problem?
Yeah, look, I know that the government's got to focus on trying to build more housing closer to the city. That certainly stacks up at the moment because feasibility is so challenged. It costs you roughly the same to build in A or B, but if the land value is higher in B, then it's going to stack up more. But equally, people need sort of lower and medium density housing as well. And there's communities out here, and they can't afford to live in the city. They want to live where they've grown up, where their social networks are, where their employment is. So I think Western Sydney can play a big role in that. We have a lot of commuter railway stations that are undercooked. We have a lot of areas where there's a train, there's good access, and we just haven't zoned those areas for uplift. I hope we see the return of what they call the missing middle. So very much the focus has been high rise, tick, great, and single houses, and that stuff in the middle, it's sort of 4 and 6 story, disappeared somehow over the last 20 years. It used to be like 20% of our housing stock. Now it's just 1 or 2%. I think you're going to see a return to that. And also modular housing, factory built housing. If we can build housing quicker, less cost. Housing productivity in the construction market's really not great at all. Every other industry seems to have become more productive except construction. So I think we've got to deal with those issues, and maybe it's through modular. Okay.
Right, here's a little cheeky question for you. The Northern Beaches have got vast, pretty beaches that typify Sydney. Same in the eastern suburbs. So Western Sydney to me. Why am I moving here?
Western Sydney's affordable. Western Sydney's diverse. It's the most diverse place in Australia, possibly the world. And I think that diversity means people are accepted. So it's a very welcoming place. It's a place that's still growing. So it's a place of opportunity. It's where you haven't necessarily been locked out of the housing market. And it's a place that's got, I think, a 20-year pipeline of infrastructure investment. We're educated, we're becoming more educated. And I think there is amenity in Western Sydney, 100%, particularly as we open up those rivers and fix up those downtowns and city centres.
Yeah, okay. We also need a football side starting to win. It's becoming a bit of a problem, mate.
100%. Yeah,
I
100%.
don't know how we can help with that, but
What's Ryles doing?
yeah, yeah. He's doing a good job, by
Is
the
he?
way.
Right,
He's doing a
okay.
good job. Now, just sort of winding things up a little bit, what's your legacy in Western Sydney in the years to come? You know, fast forward 20, 30 years and you're putting your feet up. How do people look back and remember David Borger and your contribution to the West?
Look, I mean, that's entirely up to them, Sean. But you know, I hope there's more people that want to be advocates and stand up for Western Sydney. So I hope, you know, there's more mayors that actually see themselves as game changers, as transformers for their cities. Trying to attract investment, trying to improve the physical design of the place, trying to improve social cohesion. So, you know, I just hope. I mean, if there's a legacy. Yeah, I do look to Parramatta though, and I still live in North Parramatta down the road, and you know, sort of, it is actually fun to walk past things and say, maybe I had some little role in that. I pushed, you know, the Powerhouse Museum almost didn't happen on a number of occasions, and I think hopefully we were, you know, our members we were lobbying hard, we were advocating hard, we were trying to show in the media. I mean, there was a whole group that didn't want the Powerhouse to be built. And I just think, and this is how silly it gets. So there was an old house there called Willow Grove. It was a nice old house.
Yeah.
It wasn't preserved because it was architecture. It was preserved because it used to be a hospital. Fine. But you've got to balance these things. And do you choose a $1 billion museum that will inspire the kids of Western Sydney and bring in tourism and transform a city? Or do you keep a 2-story house that was once used as a hospital that hasn't got any particular architectural significance?
Yeah.
You know, that's the balance. And I'm going for the kids. I'm going for the economy.
Right.
You know?
Okay.
Nice old house.
Nice old house. It's packed away in a warehouse somewhere, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit like Raiders of the Lost Ark, mate.
Yeah.
Shouldn't say that. I'll be cancelled now.
No, not at all. Not at all. What else do you want to talk about Western Sydney? Is there anything else that you want to tell us?
I think the other thing that's interesting about Western Sydney is its governance. You sort of look at places like Parramatta and you sort of think the boundaries were redrawn at one point in time. We've got Cumberland Council on one side, Parramatta on the other, and you sort of think, wouldn't we be a more powerful place if we had sort of larger councils, maybe popular elected mayors, more stable sort of governance? That's not having a crack at any side or anyone. I'm not trying to do that, but I think it'd be good to see us become a bit more sophisticated in our governance in Western Sydney. And I also think we need to invest in that public transport sort of. Lippington to Bradfield, the Macarthur Metro, even the one to Tallawong, the St Mary's, the Mayor of Fairfield, Cranky Frankie, he wants the rail to keep going to the airport via Prairie Wood and Parramatta. Liverpool Council wants the metro extended from Bank. I mean, there's wherever you look at it, I think rail has got to be part of the future for Western Sydney. We need to be better connected to those jobs and opportunities.
Yeah. Is there? I'm just thinking on the run here, and I have a view on this, but I'm interested in your view. Are we too overgoverned here in Australia, and New South Wales particularly?
Look, I think we are, and you see it in the planning space. Like you think of, most companies have got boards and they've got risk management, and they have risk appetite statements, and things that will take a bit more risk and a bit less risk. I think when it comes to the planning system, we have had, and I'm not blaming the individuals, we've had people working in that system who have a risk appetite of zero. They don't think any risk should ever be taken. And so we've taken so long to assess these DAs. So that culture's got to change. I mean, we can change the rules, we can change the laws as they're doing, but we've got to change the culture. And we've got to allow bureaucrats to be a little more, a little less risk averse and, to sort of take a punt sometimes on, we think on balance this is probably going to be the right thing to do, but there are some risks with it, but we've still got to go ahead and do it. I mean, people do that in business all the time. If business was as risk averse as government, business would close down, right? It'd be all over Red Rover. So I think, we've got to change that culture. And we're a very compliant, law-abiding, rule-abiding sort of society. And we've seen it with nighttime economy. We had all of those rules. I remember seeing a DA just a couple of years ago here The Albion Hotel, which is a big hotel, was going to had to move because they don't own the site. There's a developer that owns the site where they are.
Mhm.
They're going to move into Smith Street next to office blocks. No residential, no housing. They're going to be a number of floors high, and they wanted to let's have some music. And on the DA, and I think the police put this here, the condition was no live music.
Right.
Poker machine's fine.
Yeah.
Booze fine. No music. I mean, what sort of priorities is that?
Mm.
We've got to stop that.
Okay. I agree. All right. Well, let's dive into some rapid questions to finish, if that's all right, Dave. What's the best career advice you've ever received?
Best career advice is play to your strengths. Know what you're not good at and find a way to go around them, to get supports and whatever. But double down on the things that you're really good at. That's where you'll get wins.
Okay. Who's a leader that you most admire and why?
I've got to say, I always admired Paul Keating as a political leader. I thought, because I think he drafted his own rules. He played by his own playbook. He was visionary, and he was good at a blue in Parliament.
He was good. He was very entertaining, wasn't he?
Yeah.
I remember when he took on Hawke the first time.
Yeah.
He said, "This is not personal. I just want your job."
That's right. That's right.
What's one habit that's made the biggest difference in your career?
Wow. I mean, I think listening to people, Sean. I'm a bit of a talker. I'm an extrovert. You got to sit back and shut your mouth sometimes and really try and listen in and understand what people are saying. I mean, just that process of being heard makes people feel better and more motivated.
Yeah. Okay. What's a book, a podcast, or a resource that's influenced you?
Wow. Okay. So a book that I read when I started my job 13 years ago was called A New Geography of Jobs by an economist called Enrico Moretti. It's a fantastic book. It just basically explains why, Detroit was failing and the Bay Area was booming and what government should do about it. And essentially what it says is, some innovation precincts, they're job engines, they're fantastic and everyone can, but places that are really doing badly, you can't fix everywhere. And sometimes you're better to move to those places of opportunity.
Okay. And just finally, if I was to think of Sydney, I'd think about the Harbour Bridge or the Opera House. If I'm taking two photos in Parramatta to represent two photos in Western Sydney that would represent the region, where would I be going and what would the pictures look like?
Yeah, number one, I think I'd go over to the northern banks of the Parramatta River and get that hero shot of the Powerhouse Museum, that huge exoskeleton building, column-free space, the $1 billion cultural investment in the city that's going to change lives, encourage tourism, inspire kids in science, design, mathematics and the arts. That's the first one. I think the second one would be Western Sydney Airport. It took us so long to build this airport. This is a 30-year argument we had in our city, and we finally landed it, and we've built a great piece of infrastructure that's going to transform outer Western Sydney. So I think they're the two things, and it's really looking to the future. That'll open up new routes. It'll become a very busy airport over time, and hopefully it'll start to pull the economic forces westward.
Yeah. All right. Well, David Borger, thanks for your time today, and thanks for your contribution to Western Sydney. I know you're an advocate, and mate, continue on.
Thanks, Shawnee.
All right. Thanks, mate.
Cheers, mate.
That's it for today's episode of Westside Stories Beyond the CBD. If you enjoyed it, follow the show and leave a quick rating or review. It always helps more people find the stories. And if there's someone in Western Sydney whose story you think deserves a microphone, send me a message. I'm Johnston. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode.